any of the kinds of methods or skills that I teach my students, I'm constantly refining and working on myself.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm a perpetual student.
That's right. Yeah.
Just, many more years experience and just some professional experience as well, right?
Welcome to episode 147 of the Bass Shed podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Bass Shed podcast. This is a show where we talk primarily with bass players about artistry, craft, and culture. On the episode, my guest is Darren Sacks, a freelance double bassist in the Boston area. He is an educator and the creator of the double bass audition Accelerator. It was a great conversation with Darren. We covered a lot of interesting points. What it was like hearing the Boston Symphony when he was 16 years old and a saxophone player, and what captivated him about that. To switch and become a double bassist. Darren has studied with some of the most respected bassists in the country, and what's compelling is how he's taken all of that information that he learned from these amazing mentors and teachers, and how he synthesized that into a practical system for students preparing for really high-level auditions. More about my chat with Darren in just a second, but first I want to tell you about a couple things. lemurmusic.com. Everything you need for the double bass can be found at lemurmusic.com. From students to working pros, everything you need. Sheet music, bass accessories, bows, basses, you name it. Everything for the double bass. lemurmusic.com. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off. For regular listeners of the show, I know you've heard me talk about it, Jerry Jamont, 15 Timeless Bass Lines. This is a transcription book that Jerry and I put together full of 15 of his most iconic bass lines and bass solos. There's a couple of Jerry's original tunes in there and his solos on those original tunes. Pick up your hard copy or ebook at thebassshedacademy.org. Folks, if you're interested in checking out more episodes of the Bass Shed podcast, please hit subscribe wherever you are listening to it. And if you are listening on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and click the little bell to get notified about new content. At thebasshed.com, you can find all the episodes of the podcast. Members can find some podcast extras, lessons, transcriptions, all kinds of content to celebrate bass culture. Check that out, thebasshed.com. Let's get into it, folks. Let's get into my conversation with Darren Sacks. Darren and I talk about some really interesting topics and kick around some really interesting ideas. We start with talking about how 16 years old, when he was a sax player, how he got into playing the double bass and what was so captivating about the double bass and what kind of ignited him. We talked about some of the amazing mentors he's had throughout the years and how he translates that material to students. He talks about very detailed, practical elements of bass playing that not only the bass student should be aware of, but the bass educator should be aware of. I think this conversation is equally important to not only students, which we are all lifelong students, but also for folks that teach and have private studios and things. There's a lot you can glean from Darren's approach to education. The entire chat with Darren was very practical. It was very tactical and detail oriented, and there's a lot of attention given to detail. And I think as educators and performers, we need to be incorporating that all the time. This was a fantastic talk with Darren, and here it is. Here's my talk with Boston area freelance bassist and educator, Darren Sacks. Yeah, how you doing, Darren?
I'm doing okay. How you doing?
Doing all right, man. Thanks for being on the show.
I was really looking forward to this.
Cool. Likewise. Thanks for reaching out. Yeah, man. So I was checking out your site. Really cool stuff, and I have some questions. I have a lot of questions, actually. First of all, you're born and raised in Boston? Is Boston home?
I've lived here for now 11 years, but no, I was born in New York, in Queens, and then after a period of time, my family had moved to Connecticut. I went to school out there for a while and went to my undergrad at Hart, and then after that is when I moved up to Boston for grad school.
Okay. So you've been in Boston long enough. Where's the best pizza in Boston?
You know what? I'm gonna have to say Galleria Umberto's. I
Okay.
really think that they're in the North End here. I live in the North End, so
Okay.
I think that they have the best pizza.
That's the best pizza. I've only been to Boston once, and it was on a tour. So I mean, you know how that works. You get in, you play the gig, you have maybe a few hours before you got to leave town. So I didn't get a chance to check out the city as much as I had wanted to. But good to know. And next time I'm there, I'm going to check that out. You have a fascinating story because you started off as a saxophone player before switching to bass. Now, was saxophone your first instrument, or did you have some training on piano?
Well, my parents they got me a guitar when I was very
Okay.
young, and I'd taken some lessons, learning some tablature and things like that. So nothing orchestra or classical related, just
Right.
performing some James Taylor, and
Okay. Nothing wrong
everyone
with that. I love James Taylor. Yeah.
liked to hear some of those tunes. And other than that, then I started saxophone once I was in middle school, and everyone had to choose a band instrument, and
Right.
my last name was Sax, so it seemed like the obvious choice.
Yeah. And then so you get invited to this open rehearsal by the Boston Symphony, and you're captivated by the double bass. Walk me through that experience. What did that experience feel like at the time, and then what made you fully commit to being a double bassist?
Sure. Well, one thing is that going on this field trip to Symphony Hall and seeing the Boston Symphony play, they were playing Carmina Burana. So it was orchestra with chorus.
Hmm.
Oh, it was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And Boston Symphony Hall has amazing acoustics. And little did I know that fast forward many years later that had the chance to play on the
Yeah.
stage in that very same hall. But um at the time it was just the between the acoustics and the level of the sense of involvement that the musicians had, like you could just see it. And I've never heard an orchestra play in that way, just in your face. I mean, you're just used to kind of hearing your high school ensemble, and you know God, it can come across as deedle 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 all the time, right?
Right.
But then when you hear something like this, it's not the same as listening to a classical music recording. Or it's more, the analogy is more like when you go to a movie theater and you hear the soundtrack,
Mhm.
and it just fills up the space, and to experience it in a live performance setting like that was just amazing. And then, of course, my high school had a bass on hand, so it wasn't like my
Okay.
parents had to rent it when I wanted to start.
Okay. But what was it about the bass specifically out of that whole experience? What was it about the bass that makes you be like, yeah, those folks right there in the back. I want to be a part of that.
For a very odd reason, me being my adolescent self at 16, 17 years old, um, just seeing there was a one or two players in the bass section. And I'm thinking there's one that comes to my mind right now that I'm really thinking of. He has since retired from the Boston Symphony. His name was Jim Orleans. And I
Mhm.
remember just how intently, like, he would look on the stage when he was playing the instrument, and just the level of precision that was involved in it. And it makes sense because, like, later on, like when I got to hear his story, I didn't know that he was also a very impressive tennis player. So it's
Hmm.
like the way he approached the instrument was like a professional athlete almost, like
Sure.
just with incredible precision, a lot of intense focus.
Yeah.
And I think just seeing that level of engagement was quite intense for a young person like me. And um, it really resonated with me.
Okay. And there was something about James Orleans' kind of personal conduct with his intent on stage that was kind of stuck out more than anyone else from the orchestra.
That was the initial impression.
Yeah.
So, from that point, I actually had I went and emailed him and asked if I can come to Boston and play, and have a lesson with him.
Mhm.
And looking back, it's kind of embarrassing to think about this initially, because it's like I had only been playing the bass for a year at that point. And here I am reaching out to, a section bass player from the Boston Symphony.
Right.
He was very polite about it. Like he did allow me to come to Boston. I paid his lesson fee with
Sure.
some part-time, cash that I made. And then, from there, but he set the standard for me though, of like
that's great.
What my future work would be like.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. But then after shifting to the double bass, you accelerated pretty quickly. You won some scholarships, and like you're kind of like a fish in water, and you really got it going quick. What was that process like for you?
Well, like I said, when you have somebody, like in that case, Jim Orleans was my first mentor when it came to orchestra playing. And it was I was a complete noob at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I did take some private lessons from one of my local teachers, like going there and him not only being giving of his time for 90 minutes, teaching me, everything about how, like what's the standard expected at even my undergrad auditions, and working on even there was a crossover. He demonstrated one of my pieces that was supposed to be for all states, and hearing it at that level is like, and rather than me trying to compare myself to classmates and peers, instead I had a professional model and then because I started late, it's like it was a very intentional decision. Like I independently chose the instrument. It wasn't suggested to me.
Right.
So I wanted to learn the instrument from the very beginning.
Right. There's some personal involvement and personal commitment instead of, hey, we need a bass player. Why don't you go ahead and play bass? And it was dictated to you instead of like you had some initiative in it already.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's killer. It's surprising and inspiring that a young musician has such a vision for what they want to do and how much they want to invest into something at that age. Did it feel like it was atypical at the time to be so kind of laser beam focused on one thing? Because that's not common for 16-year-olds.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you that when I was that age, right, my particular school at the time had some really successful students, and like some I in my like peer group, you might as well say, or in some of the classes I was taking, you had students just getting straight A's, full like APs, and valedictorian track, and people doing a variety. It didn't even just stop there. They were in all different clubs and things like that, and National Honor Society. And so I always wanted that for myself, but somehow I didn't have the attention span for it.
Okay, for like just academics, like book classroom academics.
Yeah, I would just somehow disengage and fall asleep in front of during lectures and things like that. I mean, I'm not sure some listeners out here are relating to this, but
I do think that that's kind of, sorry to interject, I think that that's common among artists in the sense of like, it's not that artists don't have the focus, but it has to be something that really excites us for us to put our time and attention into, because if it just seems like knowledge that's unengaging for whatever reason, we're not going to do it just to do it. There has to be a deep personal connection to what we're going to invest into, and like once you get hooked by something, and obviously because of the nature of this podcast, it's a lot of bass players. I think we all share in that a little bit. Like once the bass came into our life or music in some reason, then it's like, yeah, that. And so I feel like that's kind of normal for a lot of artists.
Yeah. So like even for me, I was, it wasn't even, bass didn't even come into the picture yet. I was playing saxophone and, some, students and teachers, and you had the assistant principal who was attending our concerts, and he'd always be many people in my circles would always compliment me, and they'll just come up to me, oh, like your solo was so great, you're a great player. This was saxophone at the time, and so my parents thought that like that was the route I was going to go.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, Boston Symphony concert, and it just disrupts the whole thing, and I'm just like, I'm a seed again. Like when you just think that the plant has already started to grow,
sure,
I'm back to a seed.
Yeah, right.
And because of the fact that it was between getting a lot of social reinforcement from other people, and also just thinking that this was the thing that I was good at. Which later I found that I've almost disproven this whole thing completely. No, for real. Like at this point, I hardly believe in innate talent anymore, because what happens with many of my students that come to me, and where they start and where they end up. And I think a lot of it just has to do with systems and of how we're approaching these things. I guess looking back, if I had created the same structure I do for music, for academics or sports or anything else, maybe there would have been similar outcomes in those areas.
I agree. I agree with that, actually. But this is a fascinating topic that I don't think I've ever talked about with anybody here on the show, is the idea of nature versus nurture as it relates to the musician. Like, that's a fascinating topic, because I have come across musicians, and maybe we all have, that just seem to be able to pick up instruments, and they're really, really good. And there's a natural affinity. And a lot of times those people are multi-instrumentalists, and they can pick up anything, and within like a couple weeks, they're killing on it. So there's something natural there. But then I do agree with the idea of that it is something that absolutely has to be cultivated as well. So what are your thoughts on the nature versus nurture idea across the board?
Yeah. So what I think is that when we're talking about elite auditions,
right?
We're talking about
landing pro jobs.
It could be pro jobs. It could be like even conservatory auditions. You name it. New England Conservatory, Berklee College of Music.
Yeah.
If you're talking about Juilliard, Curtis, any of these kinds of places, everyone comes in with some degree of talent, you might as well say. But the thing is, though, is there's only a certain number of slots for audition winners. And the thing is that I think to myself is that students, can pick up an instrument, and they can, like you said, they can be very technically proficient with the instrument, and they can even figure those things out on their own, maybe without much outside guidance. It could be, you hear of different players being self-taught. But the thing is, though, is in any situation where people are rising to the top, they always need some sort of, they need to witness some kind of standard for whatever genre that they're trying to master. So like in the case of maybe someone studying jazz, right? Whether they're studying with a jazz instructor, or even if they're not necessarily in the picture, let's say but maybe they're listening to recordings, they're going to concerts, they're hearing great players. They have something to model.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
So even with orchestra playing, people can't just come to an orchestra rehearsal and just play the notes on the page and the rhythms. I mean, they can maybe in high school, right? But when they're competing at elite levels, there needs to be a deeper understanding of the styles of the people who are really proficient and have deep understanding of the music can hear the stylistic difference between Mozart, Beethoven, Mahler, and Brahms and Stravinsky, just like that. They can listen to the music, and they can pick up and know who that composer is even if they may not necessarily be familiar with that specific piece, but they know the style and they could be, oh yeah, this sounds like it could be Mozart, and they're usually right because they have deep understanding of the stylistic differences between these composers and time periods.
Now, when you talk about the style of classical music and being able to identify composers, is it the style of the personal composer or the style of the performer to play that music?
Oh, I love this question because this has come up because I recently, it was interesting. I was on my TikTok account and someone had an interesting comment about the fact that maybe many of these composers would not like to hear the pieces played like they are right now. They may have a very different concept.
Right. Like that wasn't the intention at all when it was composed. Sure, that's fascinating.
Yeah. But we have to acknowledge that whether we like it or not, there are certain gatekeepers. And it's like, I don't have a like or dislike of this. It's just like a reality I have to acknowledge. Like when I'm trying to help a student prepare for an audition. And so largely the people who are when it comes to style, like the styles and how they're executed at these auditions or in the orchestra setting when being performed for concerts or for recordings, professional recordings, generally what I notice is that there's definitely a consensus among the professional community. So like, let's say you're listening to Mozart being played by the Boston Symphony and you're hearing Mozart played by the Berlin Philharmonic and then maybe the Hong Kong Phil, but they all have a similar interpretation of it. There may be minor differences, but it's not an overhaul of certain stylistic trends that are within the professional community. So yeah, I don't know. We can't dig Mozart out of his grave and ask these questions, but certainly these composers have been played for quite a period of time, and traditions have been passed down, and they and then orchestras are playing in a similar manner to one another when performing these same pieces. So all I can do is go based on those trends.
Sure. And I think another variable in this conversation specifically would be the conductor, and how they're pursuing the music and what they're getting out of the orchestra, and how they're directing the orchestra. So that's, a whole other layer to the whatever word I'm looking for. It's another variable to the whole thing. Yeah. Teaching and coaching young bass students to prepare for these auditions is a big part of your career and something you're really passionate about. How do you go about setting, if they're coming into, they have an audition coming up. I have a couple students, one specifically I'm thinking of, that she's in the middle of doing a bunch of college auditions right now. And so I know it's kind of audition season. They come to you like maybe, I don't know, November, December. They want to start getting their thing together for the audition. How do you go about setting the standard for them to give them like, okay, if you're going to be playing an excerpt from this concerto or something, whatever you have to do for the audition, how do you go about setting that standard for like, this is what we're supposed to sound like? Do you give them recordings? Do you play it for them? Both? How do you set the bar for them before you start helping them reach the bar?
I definitely want to say I absolutely agree with recordings and demonstrations. But what I'm also, and yes, that those things help them to, find the ears for that standard that we're talking about. But what I'm also, as an instructor, I'm also looking at the student's current abilities.
Sure.
And I'm trying to, the perspective that I have may be very different from where the student might be coming from. So when they're going, what they think, let's say, is the way that the Brahms excerpt should be played, they might go and like start with, they may be completely in tune. So their intonation's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm really looking for is I'm trying to see if that player would be able to match everyone else in a section, in a
Sure.
theoretical section.
Yeah.
Like, can they blend in? And so, yeah, what that means is that I will look for whether or not they have a good sense of pulse, like whether their tempo is really solid and accurate, because that pertains to blending in with
Of
a
course.
theoretical section.
Yeah.
I'm looking to make sure that their rhythms are very precise.
Mm.
So oftentimes a lot of young students get caught up with notes and finding notes.
Yeah.
And then the rhythms are somewhat interpreted in the right direction, but it's not quite precise. So
Mm.
I'm thinking of things like dotted eighth sixteenths.
Yeah.
That's a big one. Because sometimes students will turn them into something of a triplet figure,
Yeah.
maybe an eighth with a 16th at the end. But that's not the same rhythm. And
Right.
though that kind of differentiate means everything. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I compare, learning music to learning a language,
Oh, absolutely.
because
Yeah.
you can look at it academically. But the thing is that like, for example, if someone's trying to learn Mandarin, let's say, they need to know like all those different tones, because you can use the same consonant and vowel,
Yeah.
but the tone that you use for it changes the full meaning of the word. And I'm not sure, what I see is that sometimes students who come to me for an initial lesson don't recognize that initially.
Mm-hmm.
They're just learning that for the first time, how important like an accent is, or how important that dynamic changes from piano to forte, and
Sure.
like how much that needs to be exaggerated for it to come across to a committee,
Mm-hmm.
because details like that are part of the music.
Yeah.
And if they're not executing on that, somebody else will.
Right. Right. And I think this is beautiful because you're not just talking about the technical craft of playing the bass or playing a piece of music, but you're speaking directly to the musicality of the piece and making sure that the musicality translates. And I think that is I love that, is making sure that you're teaching it musically, which is who knows? I don't know. I don't want to say equally. I don't want to say more than. It's that's what we're doing. Like, all of this is to communicate the music, not just play the bass. The bass is the tool to communicate the music. So I love that the focus is on the music, is what I'm trying to say. What kind of regular pitfalls or something that's regular that you find yourself
Excellent,
addressing a
sir.
lot? Like, what's a reoccurring thing that comes up with the young students preparing for auditions?
Yeah, so for sure, a popular request, and this is usually when people are either filling my DM box and things like that, they're usually bringing up concerns related to technique. And
Mm.
I want to say they're not wrong. Oftentimes when they come into the initial lesson with me, often that is where we start, because there are some instructors, I just want to say, there are some instructors where the philosophy on teaching is that you start with the music and the technique just follows. But the thing is that from my perspective, especially with double bass in particular, upright bass, double bass in particular, the double bass presents so many technical challenges.
Yeah.
It's an enormous instrument. The string length is crazy long.
Yeah.
The amount you have to hold the string down to the
Mm-hmm.
fingerboard, especially up in thumb position. So thumb position is a very big pitfall
Mm-hmm.
that I notice with many bassists coming to me, is that a lot of times there's a lot of uncertainty about where to position the thumb, how to position it, and then also how the fingers are, the placement differs from the lower positions.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, you might see a lot of bassists in thumb position. They might approach it almost like a sideways bass guitar, where they're
Right.
maybe going at it like this.
Yeah.
But actually, the finger is supposed to be more pointing downward and on the side this way, like with the thumb here, and then the finger approaches this thing where I can almost draw a line on my finger in a very vertical way.
Right.
So
you're for the listeners of this podcast that might not be watching the video to just see that demonstration, you're kind of talking about the corner of the finger instead of the finger being completely perpendicular to the string. You're hitting it almost at an angle, like 45 degree-ish angle, to hit the corner of where your finger would round.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's so definitely thumb position is one pitfall. Pitfall. Another thing would be the right hand. So a big one is bow distribution or just general bow management. So, like, for example, using too much bow on a short note,
Sure.
on a staccato note, they're using half the bow to play that note.
Right.
Or when it's a long note and they're only using maybe the lower half of the bow, and it's really crunching the sound up.
Mm-hmm.
So even simple changes in awareness concerning bow distribution, bow management really helps a student's tone.
Sure. I think, I mean, maybe you've dealt with this a fair amount too. I know I've had to speak to students a lot about where they're starting the note on the bow. Like, they'll start a down bow and they're already, kind of a third of the way up on the bow or something. And it's like, there's no reason to be all the way up there to start the note. Like, let's always be aware of where the bow is on the string. And then it gets into what you're talking about is the pacing and the speed and all the things to manage the whole entire stroke.
Which almost sounds like the opposite problem of what usually the students who come to me, it's maybe a bit different, because when I notice is that a lot of the students will play starting right underneath their hands, practically at very basics, the extremes side of the frog.
Okay.
They're practically, especially for French bow players.
Sure.
I'm probably speaking more on behalf of French bow right now, but a lot of them are concentrated very much in the frog of the bow and rarely get out to the tip.
Interesting.
And I have to try to help them to
free up the rest of the bow. Yeah, right. That's interesting. That's interesting.
We'll be back right after this.
Folks, this bass, I got to keep telling you about this bass, the Woodshed bass, a vintage-inspired instrument with a modern voice, designed for players who care about feel, clarity, and musical context. Built to serve the song across a wide range of settings. Right, something that was really important to me when we were designing this bass is to have a lot of flexibility in the tone of a passive bass, and so we went with concentric knobs like Fender did from 1960 to 1962. That's one of the features on the bass. The bass has a lot of features built for the modern musicians, but with some vintage swagger. So check it out, folks. Check out the Woodshed bass at thebasshed.com/Woodshed bass. All right, folks, another piece of gear I got to talk about is the Craft Geek Capsule Music Stand. The Craft Geek Capsule Music Stand is lightweight, collapsible, and designed for real-world use, whether that's practice, rehearsal, or the gig. Stop by thebasshed.com, check out the webpage dedicated to the Craft Geek Capsule Music Stand. Use the promo code SHED15 for 15% off. There will be a link in the show notes below. All right, if you are enjoying this episode, please make sure to hit subscribe wherever you are listening to the show, and stop by thebasshed.com for all kinds of bass content, lessons, transcriptions, deep dives on records. All kinds of goodies there, podcast extras, all kinds of goodies there at thebasshed.com.
Excellent, sir.
Talking about all these things and students that come to you for auditions, or even private students you've had a lot of great students throughout your upbringing. Do you recommend that students get other perspectives from other teachers or instructors so that they can kind of build their own model about how they want to approach things?
Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say that is because of the fact, first, from my own experience.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that I would be where I am right now, performing in the professional capacity that I am, if I didn't get, you know, more than one perspective.
Yeah.
So, I started out with a local teacher in my neighborhood, which then later I went to, take a couple of sample lessons with, exploring different music college options. So I got in a couple of individual lessons during that point. That gave me, might as well say, another 7 perspectives, even
Mm-hmm.
if it was on just one excerpt.
Right.
Then after that, going to my undergrad, having my principal teacher there for 4 years at Hart, and brilliant teacher, very well respected bass professor there at the time. And but then of course, I wanted to branch out of his niche, which was contemporary music.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted more specialized knowledge on orchestral playing, which is why I was taking monthly trips up to Boston to take private lessons with some of the BSO folks,
Mm-hmm.
Boston Symphony folks.
Sure.
So, whether it was full-time players or subs of the orchestra, each of those lessons turned out to be, maybe I learned, 2 more ideas about my playing. Sometimes the advice would match one another. And well, that all that did was just provide more certainty about
Right.
a certain way of playing.
Yeah.
So, you know, I I'm never of the perspective, like, I don't believe in the, like take like this idea of taking away students from studios and
Oh
this
no,
and
of
that.
course not. No.
I think it's whatever benefits the student in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's good sometimes in the early stages. Sometimes it's good for a student to stick with a certain instructor for a period of time, because if you introduce too many perspectives, it may confuse somebody.
Sure.
But at a certain point, when someone's trying to refine their abilities, it may help to bring somebody else in, even if it's short term,
Mm-hmm.
to get another perspective, especially when it comes to something um, like whether it's a very high stakes youth orchestra, summer festival, or conservatory music college audition. So no, I've had students in the past who have worked, and many of my students will work with me for a concentrated 12 weeks and then go back to their, whoever their principal teacher is.
Okay.
I don't mind that at all.
Yeah.
I that's a that's very much within my realm.
Mm-hmm. When having private students, and even if it's kind of a shorter duration, like a 3-month thing, like you just mentioned, anytime we're teaching someone, we quickly have to absorb how to communicate with each specific student, right? That's kind of part of the gig. How do you go about building a pathway for each specific student?
The first thing I do is really assess a couple of things. First is I assess their, of course, current music ability.
Mm-hmm.
So their ability, this is, just simply put, their ability to play the instrument, what their level of musicianship is, like how, what level of musicality they're expressing through their playing already. And then from there, I'm also assessing what their level of, I don't want to say, I don't want to use the word discipline so much, but their level of, what is their current system for learning music?
Okay.
Is it a sustainable system, or is it one that is causing burnout? And, are they maybe, how can I make their system more efficient?
Sure.
Where they're spending less time and getting more accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are some who will spend, maybe not at the high school level, maybe this is more of a collegiate level thing, but you'll have students spending 6 hours in a practice room, but not all of those 6 hours are productive In fact, maybe they would benefit more from getting outside the practice room and even, listening to live performances, or being, getting out to the community and talking to to whether it's classmates who are doing well, also, just peers, professionals as well. When I was a student, I think one thing I did very well is that, in addition to getting my practice time in, yes, like, sure, I would hibernate in the practice room and, work on whether it's my technique or the solo or orchestra excerpts at the time. But, that's not how, that's only when I know the standard. The thing is I have to find ways outside the practice room to raise that standard.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means getting out there and playing in front of, taking extra lessons, or, getting other perspectives. Go up to ask your orchestra conductor if they have time to listen to your audition material, get their feedback. Just put yourself in a position. Master classes are another big thing. For the high school level, maybe that means attending summer festivals. That was one of my biggest regrets, is that I would take lessons, but then, a lot of, when I see my current students, like, they're all going to, whether it's Interlochen or BUTI and those kind of, Tanglewood, those kind of organizations. And, like, they're already learning from other, professional players, outside of just, they're in, one youth orchestra. So they're putting themselves in an environment where they're getting constant feedback.
Sure.
And I like that idea of having frequent feedback loops, whether it's, recording yourself or doing mock auditions. You're always getting out there. You're always, find yourself where you're playing, but then you also assess, and then you see where adjustments can be made. And then the third one is mindset. And so that one,
I love this. Yeah, I love this stuff.
Mindset's a real killer, because that can kill systems, and it can kill musicianship, both at the same time.
Yep.
Because if you think that your abilities are limited, like, there's no way, it's just somebody else is, they just lucked out with the right genes.
Right.
And you might not think that you have the capacity to grow. That's and that ends up being like a negative belief that somebody has to work through.
Sure.
And so, yes, I have students like that come to me, for initial lesson, and that might be their starting place for the road to, future audition wins.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people go from that level to, making, Northwestern, or, one of those kinds of schools.
Sure.
So I've worked with a variety of different, beginning points.
Yeah. Something you mentioned was helping younger players and students, making sure that they have a sustainable system or strategy in place. And I know you studied with Orrin O'Brien, and she has a very a very meticulous way of scheduling practice time. If I remember correctly, she breaks it up into like 2 sections, and like it's very organized about how she speaks to organize your practice time to build a sustainable system. Do you incorporate Orrin's approach, or have you developed your own kind of strategy for a practice time outline?
For me, because students are coming oftentimes with very specific goals.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they have an audition, let's say, coming up in 3 months, or they have an audition coming up in 6 months. And so a lot of times, initially, when I'm working with someone, the goal is rather short term rather than long term initially. And so I do want to get them that initial win.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that becomes a catalyst for everything that comes afterward.
Mm-hmm.
And so where I think that maybe, and by the way, I like you said, I've taken lessons with Orrin O'Brien, and I really respect her as both a mentor and as a professional player. I even have her book and everything that I remember she gave to me at a cafe in New York once. And but where I think that my approach is that I like addressing the core issue, like whatever is the biggest problem that the student is facing. Say it's shifting, or say it's string crossings.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I spend 3/4 of the lesson addressing I want to help them get to the next level of that specific pain point.
Right.
Because not addressing foundational technique head on can oftentimes be very limiting for students who already have to learn, whatever audition repertoire that they have for their upcoming audition. So I like to be very surgical in my approach to foundational technique. So yeah, that may not mean using the same model for every single student.
Sure.
Because everybody's coming with different issues with their playing or approach to the music.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge that.
And music with different demands.
Exactly. And so, for me, I think the more important thing when I'm coming up with a plan for their practicing for their practicing for the week, I always make sure that the goals are, number one, that they're doable,
of course,
and that it doesn't require a tremendous amount of motivation to accomplish it.
Okay.
I want it to be, if there was, let's say, a whole waveline, let's say, of somebody's motivation, I want it to be below that waveline, the amount of material that I give. Because I want it digestible, and I want it to be in such a way that it's like, yeah, I could see myself doing this for, X number of minutes or an hour or so, whatever it is, to accomplish that major goal.
Yeah.
So, and for every person, their threshold will be different, but I always make sure that it's at a level that they can get quality work accomplished.
And now, how do you go about assessing where that threshold is in lesson 1? Because after lesson 1, when it gets into lesson 2 and 3, then you can understand what their track record is of how much time they've put in and what kind of progress they've turned out in a week. But when it's lesson 1 and you don't know what that threshold is, what do you prescribe on lesson 1? Something really light to test the waters?
Let me give an example. So, like, for example, I had a student who came to me and they said that they were going to play the first movement of the Eccles Sonata. And so they started out and, they did one run through of the movement for me. And then I wanted them to focus on even just getting that initial B flat in tune that comes up right after the pickup D. So the downbeat B flat, it's their first thumb position note. And it wasn't in tune initially. So the first thing I do is I point out, like, by the way, that B flat was not in tune. And so first I see if they're by being aware of the issue that they correct it on their own.
Sure.
If they don't correct it on their own, I will offer, let's say, advice about it. Like, let's say, make sure to keep a greater distance or a smaller distance between the thumb and that finger. So now I'm aiding them and giving them instruction on how to find it. But then let's say that doesn't work. Then I start, let's say the tone is very crunchy. So then now we're moving into there's more of a fundamental issue going on with the right hand to address. See, like I'm getting down to the technique level.
Sure.
And so all of a sudden, this doesn't become an Eccles issue.
Right.
It becomes maybe a bow weight issue, or maybe a speed or a placement. So now we're choreographing virtually each note and move until it becomes, intentional technique.
Right. That's right.
So yeah, sometimes it could be initially overwhelming on that first lesson for some, because they're maybe only accomplishing in that lesson one or two measures. But that's the foundation that sets them up, because all they're doing is taking it's very the progress builds one on top of the other.
Yeah, kind of comprehensive. Like it's always snowballing on what came before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be that way till the very end of the first movement.
Of course.
It just starts off initially because it's just learning about, like, during the week, they're no longer going to be able to play that whole movement as a run through and just repeat the whole thing. All of a sudden, there is more intentional work that has to be done.
Sure. Then with younger students who may not have put in the same attention to shaping it artistically as they've spent working on the craft of it all and just the technique, how do you get them to open up to start to explore those things?
Yeah, so a lot, one thing that from my prior training that I remember, especially in my younger years, right, of playing the instrument, one method of teaching that didn't always work out for me back then was trying to make like visual analogies, like saying like, oh, make it sound like butterflies, or flapping their wings, like just very delicate like that. And or somebody saying, oh, well, make it just a lot of visualization. And so
to hit pause for a second, is that how you think about it? Do you think in those kind of more esoteric, impressionistic visualization terms when you're for yourself?
To be honest, no.
Okay. I was just curious. No. I was just curious, what if that was something that responded with you personally, and I just wanted to get context on this. Okay, go ahead.
And so, no, sure, the context is important if I'm doing a pre-concert talk to somebody, right? If I was doing a pre-concert talk, I definitely want to know that context. And sure, maybe, those things might, it might influence my interpretation of the music. But when it comes, still, there are specific techniques behind it.
Yeah.
And when somebody's just learning technique, it's more important to point out specifics to them. Things like, how do you achieve that sound? Okay, do you try to maybe turn the hairs in, be maybe on one or two or three hairs for this particular passage, because if you do that, maybe you'll get a little bit more air in the tone.
Right.
That will come across more, it will sound lighter. So being very specific, I always, whatever idea that I have, right, I always make sure that it's not a visualization. I try to make it about, I tell them what to do with the bow, with their finger.
Sure.
And
make it very tactical, something that can be applied. Yeah.
Exactly. And also, that also relates to another thing where I think is another pitfall for musicians, and that is note lengths. So I think
it comes up a lot in almost every style of music. Not enough attention is given to this across the board. Whether it's you're playing electric bass with the drummer and how that pocket's going to feel when you put the notes like that or end the notes there, or even in this scenario when, more of an orchestral thing. Yeah, note length is huge and completely under acknowledged.
Of course. And, note length and rhythm really ties into this other idea that I've been thinking of lately. And that is that a lot of people who play unpitched instruments like percussion, they have no problem. They're drilling rhythm all the time. That is everything for them.
Sure.
But like for pitched orchestral instruments, whether it's bass or violin or flute, horn, oftentimes rhythmic drive is not emphasized enough, I don't think, in their study oftentimes. And it's underestimated, especially when it comes to orchestra auditions.
So give me a for instance about rhythmic drive and how that relates to note length, because rhythmic drive can also deal with articulations on and attack. So when we're talking about rhythmic drive just in relation to note duration, let's speak on that marriage.
Sure, of course. So, like, for example, when somebody is playing Baroque music, like Bach or Vivaldi or something like that, um, you'll see players who make some of the eighth notes will be long and some of them will be short. Because the thing about Baroque music is oftentimes there aren't articulations written on top of the notes. So they're expected to know the style.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes it's me communicating to them something that's not even written on the page.
Sure.
And then maybe, also alongside that, exposing that student to a variety of different Baroque pieces, having them listen to the recordings and, and analyzing things like consistency of note lengths. And so, yeah, like note lengths and articulation, rhythm are all kind of coexisting. They all relate to each other, because if you're not consistent with if the specific excerpt or piece demands that all eighth notes are the same, so sorry about that. If a certain excerpt demands that all eighth notes are short, then if somebody is going and playing some short and some long, then sometimes what happens is it doesn't have it just doesn't it's not intentional enough sounding.
Right. It's the pulse is going to suffer because it's not consistent. I mean, something that's always going to establish the pulse is regularity and repetition, and if the repetition is broken by something being longer or shorter than the other one, it's not consistent and, again, intentional. As the performer being the one who has to create that, yeah, it's intentionality. Intentionality, is that a word? But yeah, what you're saying, I agree.
I think from as an instructor and as I'm seeing which students are succeeding at these auditions, I can't stress it enough how important it is for their repertoire to be rhythmically coherent to the adjudicators. That's all I'm going to say.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stress that enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I think that's where the differentiating factor comes into play between getting waitlisted versus getting into the music college.
Right. You think a lot of it is, I'm trying to put it all into one statement, but the rhythmic fortitude is needs to be prioritized more than it regularly is. It would kind of be like the topic sentence.
Yeah. Because also the bass being, such a low-pitched instrument, many instruments that students are playing on, including maybe, let's just say my own or any, professional player, but compared to the violin, bass strings do not respond, quite as quickly.
Of course, yeah.
We have to be so cognizant of timing, and especially when we're playing with other instruments. We're playing in a section. We're not just playing in a section. We're playing with the rest of the orchestra. So I'm oftentimes telling my students to think of the greater context, like when we're listening to pieces or analyzing the score. And I say, hey, even if the conductor is conducting, let's say in 4 or whatever it is, you don't always have to look at the conductor. You can tune into this other instrument playing the same rhythm as you and lock in with that.
Sure. Listening across the ensemble, yeah.
Yes.
Sure. And then, because it's all moving together. You know, I remember talking to a youth orchestra not that long ago and using the analogy as a school of fish, like you're always moving together, you know. What are some personal goals you're working on right now?
For me, one thing is I definitely want to see more audition wins, from my students. I will always continue to put a lot of effort into, learning what the most competitive auditions, what it entails, and how the industry is evolving, and
Hmm.
how the expectations are changing. And then for me as a professional player, I would like to go back to auditioning again and try to see if I can score a full-time position.
Hmm. Because you're freelance around the Boston area right now, correct?
I freelance in Boston.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you just looks like you're staying pretty active. You're with the Cape Symphony, the Boston Philharmonic, the Boston Lyric Opera. What other orchestras are you playing with, or what other ensembles?
Well, also the New Bedford Symphony. I also do a lot of union level performances over at Boston Symphony Hall or at the Wang Theater. These are
Hmm.
some like big theaters around Boston. And I get called for recently a lot of like video game soundtrack.
Yeah,
Or
In LA, that's kind of a big scene. I know that's a big deal out here. I don't know how much of like the sessions are being cut in other places of the country or anything. I only know about LA, but I know that that's a big deal. Like those landing those
a big
gigs.
deal.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not a gamer by any means, so I don't even know what the level of what games are anymore. But yeah, it's like legit work. Just just playing on video game soundtracks.
It's wild to
Yeah.
see these how these concerts fill up Symphony Hall, Wang Theater. These are Ticketmaster level
Wow.
concerts. So
For the soundtrack to a video game?
yes,
Wow. That's nuts. Are you a gamer? Do you play games? Do you the video games?
not these games,
No.
not these games. No. So I always, whenever I get these kind of performances, I always put it, on my Instagram stories and try to see if anyone's familiar with them. And then,
Mhm.
I always have people reaching out and be like, "Oh, I know that game. I played on this. The soundtrack's amazing on this. You should be so lucky to be playing this." And there's me like, "What is this?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Music's
Right.
incredible though.
Yeah. That's cool, man. That's cool. Now these being your personal goals for your career, have you applied the same treatment to yourself that you would a student of building yourself a specific strategy to make sure that these goals are met? And have you given yourself a timeline?
Of course.
Yeah.
Um, I am constantly using the any of the kinds of methods or skills that I teach my students. I'm constantly refining and working on myself.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm a perpetual student.
That's right. Yeah.
Just many more years experience and just some professional experience as well, right? So
Sure.
that's the main difference. But in the end, I'm a lifelong student.
Of course.
And in terms of timelines, yeah, I would like to see myself get to all the different goals that I just mentioned earlier, maybe
Mhm.
within the next 10 years or so. I'd
Okay.
like to see it in the next decade.
Okay. Okay. Nice. And that was something I was curious about when preparing for this talk and this interview is how has all your detailed approach to coaching for auditions, how has that shaped your performances, and how have your performance experience shaped your teaching approach?
Well, the biggest thing that I learn from my students is their environments and
Mm,
just how much of this is not just a matter of being self-disciplined and self-motivated, but getting out there and building a community around yourself. And
okay.
you need to get out there. You have to talk to other people. You have to
Hmm.
be social,
Yeah.
and you have to be you know, earn people's trust in your environment. That
Okay.
means being connecting with others. You can be helpful to them. You can also ask them questions, and maybe they can help you in. You never know who the next person you meet can be either your next mentor or the person who refers you to one of these gigs that I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You never know, and just be cognizant of dedicating a certain amount of time to making yourself visible, getting out
Sure.
there, playing in front of people. Go ahead and you see that in your community that there's a professional, a principal player of the regional ensemble. Just send them a quick email. Take a lesson with them.
Sure.
Just constantly go out there and be in front of people and let people see you're playing. And some people are afraid to take that risk because they feel like their playing is not good enough. But they have to be open to the feedback that they receive. Because when people see that you take their feedback seriously, they take you more seriously.
I feel like you have a very proactive approach to all of this, which I love. Do you find that you have to get younger musicians to open up to be that assertive and be proactive and really kind of take that kind of ownership, or do some people just have it more naturally? I feel like maybe it's a West Coast thing. I have to kind of, everything's super laid back over here. So, I have to come on, get out there, go do it, kind of push them a little bit to open up, to be a little bit more proactive in some areas. In other areas, they're very proactive. But when it in regards to what you're talking about being social, connecting, building a community, do you have to kind of coach them in that as well?
I find that I don't actually.
Oh, wonderful.
Because of the fact that not everyone in life is going to be an extroverted personality, and I don't expect people to be complete extroverts. And in fact, most of my most successful students are very introverted.
Sure.
Not very introvert, but introverted enough that, they may not be the loudest person in the room, but they are very good at listening.
Right.
And as the most important thing is you don't have to talk a lot, but just be present with others. Go and nothing. Even if you're not the person who can entertain other people, no one's expecting that from you. You can go and be present, and you can listen, and you can pick up on things when you're around people, and you can learn from that.
Sure.
And I think that's the most important thing. You can't learn from others if you're hibernating for 8 hours in a practice room. That's
right. Right. Wonderful. So you have the coaching service. For all the listeners out there, please drop your website so they know where to find you if they would like to, study with you for their auditions. What is that website?
Absolutely. So my website is www.darrensacksbasscoach.com. I was just going to mention that if you go to the Work With Me page, you'll find where you can book a 30-minute, you can book a call with me, and we can get a 30-minute, it's an audition strategy plus orchestra excerpt refinement session.
Darren, thanks so much for being on the show, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Right. That was my talk with Darren Sacks. He had a lot of great things there, a lot of great mindset things to have for the educator and how to establish a good strategy with students. One thing that I really liked that he said was when he talked about establishing a standard. I thought that was a great way of putting it, to put it in context, what it is that you're working on and what a goal is and should sound like, instead of just chasing this idea of like, well, is that it? Is that good enough? Is that, I kind of got it. Like, it's kind of up to tempo. but really establishing what that standard is going to be. Yeah, it was very, very well said. For folks checking this out, please drop in the comments below what some of your standards have been for your career and what the standard has been for you practicing your different material, whatever that might be. I'm curious to know from the bass community where you folks find the standard to continue to strive for. It's very fascinating to me. Big thanks to Darren for being on the show and look forward to having him back on. That's about all I got for this one, folks. That's about all I got. I'll catch you on the next one in a minute.